Hello everyone, welcome to ICSE Boards Hub. The topic of today's video will be parameterized method, one of the important topics and a fairly simple topic. I'll make it very simple for you to understand. The subheaders that we are going to cover is what are parameterized methods, the basics. Then we'll delve into parameterized methods with and without the return statements. Many questions in the board exams have been asked on this topic. Then we look at some practice questions, primarily output questions definitely in this video, and some programming questions whether in this video or the next, but that these are the topics we'll cover within the whole parameterized methods section of Java programming. So let's go and let's begin the learnings. Let's begin, everyone. First things first, what are parameterized methods? Now, before I jump into this topic, I would like to say that please do make sure that you have watched the previous video on methods that I made before that, because in that we have discussed in details what are methods, why are they used, how do we define a method, what is the syntax, and some basics, so that when you come to this topic you are clear on all the basics of what methods actually are, how they are defined, right? What is a return type, what is an access specifier, how do we name the methods, what are parameters, etc. We are already clear, so that I am sure that my student watching this video is already clear on these topics which I have already covered. Now moving on to this topic of parameterized method. As the name already suggests, parameterized method is a method which contains some parameters within these parentheses, basically. Whichever method has some value or some data type, some variable within the parameters is called a parameterized method. So this is the only definition that you need to worry about. Now, as a topic, what we are going to cover is some what you call output questions, some details on this parameterized methods. Okay, and if you look at this particular case, right, what is happening in this one? If you look at the function definition, we see that this is a public method, right? It has a void return type, that is, it does not return any value. We have already seen this in previous video. The name of this method or function is add. Then it has two parameters. Since it's a parameterized method, it has two parameters, int a and int b. Now what does this entail? What does this mean, having parameters? This means that this function, this method expects these two values. Okay, these two values. So basically, whenever we are going to invoke or call this method, this parameterized method is going to expect what? Two integer values, int a and int b. It is going to expect that we send it two integer values, right? Now what is happening within the method? That is pretty straightforward. We have taken a variable c. It's just adding the two variables, the two parameters, int a and int b, and then it's printing the sum, basically, which is the c variable. So it's simply adding those two parameter variables. Now when we look at the main function, right, where does Java execution start from? It starts from the main function. Okay, we start here in the main function. Now this line is executed, then what is happening is creation of the object of the class a, right? This is needed to call this function. We have already seen it in the previous video. So we are creating an object named ob of the class a and using that to call the function add. ob.add, ob is the object name, add is the function name. We are calling the function, and since this function, as we already saw, it expects two values to be sent, so we are sending two values to the function. Now what we need to understand in parameterized methods is it takes care of the position. Okay, if 2 is the first variable, it makes sure that it goes to the first parameter. Okay, if 3 or 5, whatever I'm confused by my own handwriting, I'm sorry, I'll make it 3. So if 3 is the second value, it goes to the second variable, that is b. So A becomes 2 and B becomes 3. This is what the method was expecting. It was expecting us to send two integer values, int A and int B, when we call it. That is what we have done. So A becomes 2 and B becomes 3. Okay, A becomes 2, B becomes 3, and C becomes 2 plus 3 equal to 5. And then we get the output sum colon is 5. This is the output that we get. So this is the whole crux of parameterized method. It just that it has some variables in its within the parentheses, and it expects us to send those values when we are calling the function or the method. So this is the basic that we have already covered. Now let's look at some more concepts. Now let's look at the first basic program for parameterized method. Write a program using parameterized method, which means that we will have some variable inside the bracket. Okay, parameter hoga koi na koi named check. We have to name the parameterized method as check, which checks if the number is prime or not. Very simple. The program should display prime if it's a prime number or not prime if it's not. Now let me tell you, I'm not going to go too much into detail, or okay, maybe I'll touch briefly on checking of the prime number, because this is something we have already covered in our looping videos. So if you have not seen those videos, to jaake go and look at the looping videos where we have already covered such programs. What we are here to do is write the program without returning any value. We need to write the program, use a parameterized method, and not return any value. For everyone, it should be clear that we need to write the parameterized method using void, because we don't have to return any value. Okay, now very quickly I'll write the program and then we'll discuss it in detail, because here is the full program, guys. I've written it. Now I'll explain it to you in detail. Obviously, first we start with import java.util.star. What is this? We are importing the utility package, and star means this is a MCQ which can be asked. I hope that you all know already, because this is a very basic concept. Star means we are importing all the classes of the util package. Okay, star ये होता है star का meaning. Then we have defined a class A. Green brace is for the class. Please note that. I'll create it at the end as well. I'm sorry I missed that. Okay, green brace is for the class. And then we have defined public void check. Public void check. Now why void? Because the program ka first part required us to not return any value. That is why we have written void. Check is the name of the method, parameterized method. And we have defined a parameter integer x, because we wanted to check if this integer x is a prime or not. Since this is a parameterized method, it has a parameter x, it will be expecting an integer value when we call it later. This, whenever we call this, it will be expecting us to send an integer value. Okay, this we have already seen in the last class, so I'm not going into the detail. Now within this method, this portion is where the check for prime number is happening. This is a basic looping ka program, check for prime number, very basic. This we have already done in our previous classes. So if you don't know, I would recommend to visit that, because abhi I'll not be going into a lot of detail about this. Okay, what is happening is I have defined a count variable. Okay, I've run a loop from 1 to where? To the number, basically 1 to the number x, 1 to the number x, and then I'm checking is x mod I double equal to 0. Basically, क्या x I से divisible है? I की value is going from 1 up to the number, and if yes, I'm adding the count, increasing the count by 1. How does this concept work? I'll tell you very quickly, but I'll not go into the detail, because this is something I've already covered. For example, 3, for example, if the number is 3, right, then how do we define if it is a prime number? All the numbers less than 3 up to 3, how many numbers are there? 1 2 3. How many times do these numbers divide the number 3? 1 divides 3 completely, and 3 divides 3 completely. So 3 is completely divided only twice. That is, then in this case it becomes a prime number. You can check any other number, any other prime number as well. For example, if I check 5, for example, from 1 to 5, how many times will 5 be completely divided? Once by 1, once by 1, and once by 5, no other number. And this stands true for all the prime numbers. That is why we have used the same logic. I've run a program from 1 to that number and checked one by one, is the number being divided completely? X mod I double equal to 0 is checking is it being divided completely. If yes, then I increase the count by 1. Okay, I'm not going into any more detail. I've already covered this. If you want, you can check my looping wala class. Now if the count is double equal to 2, that is what I told you. If the count is double equal to 2, that is the number was divided twice, then obviously it is a prime number, otherwise it's not a prime number. Simple. Now pay attention to where the braces of the functions are. The function started here, and everything, this checking, count, and then printing is all happening within the function. And within, now we define the void main function, that is I defined the scanner class. This also I have done in the previous, just the previous video, that is why I'm not going to the detail. The scanner class sc, I print that, okay, enter a number, I save that number into a variable num, and now I'll use the class object, I'm creating a class object a.ob. Okay, I missed the dot. A.ob equal to new a. I've created a class object name ob. Now using this ob, I'll call the method ob.check. Now when I'm calling the method, I will send what? The number which I've taken from the user, num. I've taken a number from the user and saved it using the scanner class in the number, in the variable num, and that is what I'm sending to the function here, because the function, parameterized function, expect this value. I've sent that number. Now all the check will be performed on this number. X becomes the number, right? And then all the checks are being performed, and then it checks if the count is 2, it prints prime. If not, it prints not prime. Okay, this is how we have written the whole program without returning any value using void. Now we'll see the second case when this returns a string value, this particular method. So everyone, let's look at the second part. The second part is returning. Write this program by returning a string value. So by this we'll understand. I've kept this previous answer still here. The previous program to the answer to the part 1 is still here, because I want you to know how this will change, and we will get to the second program. That way our understanding will be much better. Okay, that is why I have not erased this. So what we need to do is we need to return a string value now using this function. So since it will return, we cannot use what we cannot use. We cannot use the void keyword. Void means we are not returning. Okay, when we don't return, we need to print within the same function. That is basically a restriction. But in this case, we need to return a string. That is why I'll replace the void by a string data type, because the question asks me to return a string. That is why I've replaced it. Now as I move on, I'll still have the count variable. I'm receiving a number, I define the count, I run a loop from 1 up to this number, and I check one by one for all the values of I, 1 2 3 up to the number whichever the user has input, and I divide it and check if it's completely divisible. I increase the count by 1. Correct? That is what I had already explained it to you. This is the basic logic of prime number. The whole logic remains the same. And now after this loop has run completely from 1 up to the number, if the count comes out to be 2, then it's a prime, otherwise it's not a prime. But the program expects us to return a value. We have already mentioned string. So instead of printing this, notice how the program is changing when we have replaced void. Instead of now printing, we'll replace this print command by a return statement. Okay, we'll replace this print commands by return statement. What we'll write is return, what in the first case it was prime, yes. If it's divisible, if the count is 2, we return prime, otherwise return not prime. Correct? Fairly simple, very minor change, but now we are returning a string value. So we kept replace the void, and now we are properly returning prime if the count is 2, which is the condition of prime numbers, right? Now one other change we need to make, just one other change, and our program is complete. Our program is sort of complete. Okay, one or two other change. What change we need to make? And that change is, since now the function is returning a string, right? We are sending back a string value, we're returning a string. In case the count is 2, we're returning the string prime, and in case the count is not 2, it's more than 2, right? We're returning not prime. But since now we are returning, we need to receive it, we need to be able to receive it when the function is called. Basically over here, when this function is being called, right, we go land up here, we check everything, and then it returns either prime or not prime. Now in order to receive that, we need a string variable over here, we need a string variable. That is one change we only. So I'll replace this line as well. Okay, we need a string variable, so I'll take a string variable, string pr equal to ob dot check. Okay, the name of the function check, and I'm still sending the same variable now. Okay, this is the change. What change it is? Now I'm still calling the function and still sending this number that we had taken from the user here, but since the function is now returning some string, I need to have a variable which will store this returned value, either prime or not prime, and now I will print it. Now I will print this. I'm erasing these braces for now. Now I'll print system dot out dot print ln. I'm just writing pr, okay, for no message. So basically now I've printed whatever was received as a return value from the function. It is got saved in pr variable which I took, then I'm just simply printing it. And now I close the brace of the public static void main class, and then of the main class, sorry, the public main function here, and then the class. So this is the basic program. Okay, it's fairly simple. Now it's very clear to you how the program has changed when we did not return a value, in the first case the void, and when we returned a string. Okay, then how did the program change? There are very minor changes. We need to replace the void with string, we returned a particular value, we needed to receive that returned value, and then we printed it. So I hope this will give you a lot more clarity on how the program changes when we use void versus a particular return type. Okay, now let's look at some interesting output questions. Now this is a very interesting output question, and if you feel a little confused, a little dazed by looking at this output question, don't worry, I'll break it down completely for you, and you'll be able to understand it completely end to end. Now what is happening in this one? I have a class named test, then I have a void swap parameterized function. What does the void mean? It does not return any value, right? What does a swap mean? It's just the name of the function, and it has two parameters. What is happening within this particular parameterized function? If you have done some level of programming, you have done a fair number of programming questions, you can easily see that what we are doing within the parameterized function is taking a temporary variable named int. First, I'm saving the value of a within the temporary variable. Then within, I'll maybe write it down. I've taken a temporary variable. Okay, temporary variable becomes a becomes b, and b becomes temp, right? So what we are doing is first transferring the value of a into the temporary variable, then transferring the value of b into the temporary into the a variable. So basically a has become b, right? And then we are transferring the value of temporary variable into b. What was temporary variable? It was a. So b becomes a, right? B has become a and a has become b. What has happened is we have swapped the values of a and b. That is what is happening within this parameterized function. So now we are basically swapping the values of a and b within this function. But what happens after this? After this, we have the main function. We have taken two variables x and y, which have the values 5 and 10 respectively, and then this function is called. Now this is very interesting. When we call the function swap, okay, when we call the function swap, what happens is x, the value of x goes into a variable, okay, and the value of y goes into the b variable. So a becomes x, which is what, 5, and b becomes y, which is what, 10. So a becomes 5 and b becomes 10, and then we perform the swap inside the parameterized function. So after the swapping, a will become 10 and b will become 5. This will happen after the swapping. But what we are doing is, this swapping is only restricted within the function. You can see swapping is happening within the function, and that too on a and b. It's not happening on x and y. X and y still have the same value, 5 and 10. So if I print after calling the function, the value of a and b are exchanged, but did the value of x and y exchange? No, the value of x and y is still 5 and 10 respectively. So the output will be 5, 10. This is a tricky one. I'll tell you why. Because people feel that the value of a and b is swapping, so x and y will also swap. No, that swapping is only limited to the value or the variables a and b, and not x and y. This basic is called call by value, and we'll learn about this in detail in the coming video, but I'm just telling you, because this was a call by value, right? That is why x and y's value did not change, only a and b changed, and that too within the parameterized function. That is why the output was 5 and 10. Okay, now let's look at the next. This is the next quick question for you. Again, an output question. What is happening in this one is, we have a demo class, we have a function, parameterized function, which has void. That is, it will not return any value. It takes a parameter x, integer, and it prints value colon x. Simple, no problems there. Then we have the main function. We create an object of the demo class, right? And then we call the function obj.show. We are calling the function. Now, as you can see, you might in the first observation not observe any issue here, but in parameterized methods or function, we have a parameter. So basically this function show is expecting, when we call it, it's expecting an integer value, कि यहाँ पे मुझे एक integer value मिलेगा. I will send an integer value whenever I call it. So when I'm calling the function obj.show, I should send inside the bracket some integer, whether a number or some other integer variable x, which I would be taking, something I must be sending. But since I'm not sending it, what will happen? It will give me an error. Parameterized function will give me an error that I have not sent any value, so it will give me a compilation error. So this is the right answer of this particular output question. I hope you were able to get it. Now I've covered the basic of parameterized functions in this particular question. In this particular video, we have looked at two different programs, one with no return type, that is void, one with string return type. We have seen two variations of the same program. Then we have also seen two interesting output questions. In the next video, stay tuned for more such amazing concepts on methods.